Hey now, and welcome to episode 27 of the Help Find the Others podcast. If you've been here all along, well then welcome back. But if this is your first time listening to us, well then welcome. I'm your host, Ruben, and as always, on the line is my co-host, Stan. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Ruben.
Awesome. So, this episode was with Mew, as she wanted to be called. So she recently found her way to our Discord server and reached out and wanted to tell her story. And it was a pretty crazy story, don't you think so, Stan?
Oh, yeah. That's an understatement.
Yeah. I think, much like other people, that have psychedelic epiphanies, and it's hard to explain what happened and what the meaning is. She seems to really be able to describe it in a eloquent way, and I really enjoyed talking with her. And I think the flow was pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And I think we covered both sides of it all. Like, we don't always cover some of the negatives of going into a life of being a psychonaut and diving deep into those waters. But it was, sometimes it can be refreshing hearing that, it's not all flowers and daisies and rainbows and all that. There's some struggle with it all. And it's important for people to hear, definitely.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely like showing both sides of the coin. And I hope that's what everyone, enjoys this episode for that. So, I'd like to present to you guys Mew. Hey there, Mew. Thanks for coming on. I'm glad you found your way to our Discord and you contacted me through there and wanted to come on and tell your story. So thanks for coming on tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here and to meet both of you and everyone in the community.
Yeah, no, that's
absolutely,
that's awesome. I love when we've been going for a while and you start to be like, okay, we're kind of like the same people talking to each other, and then like this new wave of people come into the Discord and it's a whole new perspective and experiences and stuff like that, and it's great. So you definitely have a very interesting story and have seen some of the most profound changes in your life and your yourself through psychedelics. But why don't you just start out with a intro of how psychedelics came into your life and the buildup of being a psychonaut?
Well, a lot of it goes back to my just general curiosity for anything that I was doing when I was growing up. It's just like, I wonder how deep this whatever it is goes, like a software on a computer or really just any activity. And I was always trying to like min-max things for whatever reason. But growing up, I was really anti-drugs, just because I had a bad exposure to them just growing up. But when I went to college, I had discovered the joys of alcohol and cannabis, and boy, those are exciting. And that sort of opened the door for me to realize like how deep all of this goes. And it really just was a big umbrella experience, just anything mind altering, just to open the eye a little bit to tell there's more to this, obviously.
Yeah.
And the opportunity arose to try mushrooms for the first time. And I hopped right on top of that and tried mushrooms with a few of my roommates. And we stayed in my dorm room the whole time. And a brief, what's it called when you step outside of the spaceship and walk around?
The spacewalk, yeah.
Yeah. But the mushrooms showed me that there's more to just everything compounded on top of everything. Just everywhere you look, there's just an infinite amount of more to it. And that was the absolute hook in my lip, and it towed me along basically to here, and I've been really happy about that. But it snagged a few things along the way. After that, I ended up trying 25I N-Bohm, which I do not recommend. Can kill you. And that was very different from the mushrooms. It was very much geometric as opposed to the fluid of mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you know? Did you know that's what you were? I know that that's a drug that is commonly sold as acid, but isn't.
Yeah.
Or did you take it knowing that's what it was?
Well, I was under the impression that it was some sort of acid, but I wasn't well researched because I'd only stepped a couple feet into this realm of experiences. I was under the impression it was acid when we were buying it, and then we're like, what's the quantity of how many units of acid is this? And he's like, well, it's not technically acid, but you take 3 of them, and that's a good amount. And we're like, okay, we weren't really sure what we were doing.
Gotcha.
But just based off of the experience I had and the particular metallic taste of it is on blotter paper, which I kind of tell is 25I, but I'm not absolutely positive on that.
Gotcha.
But I can see why people relate it to acid and sell it as acid, because it has a lot of the similar experience themes. It's a lot more geometric and more like circuitry for me when I'm on them.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I tried LSD, and this time I was on my own. And trying the tryptamine, comparing it to a phenethylamine, compared to a lysergamide, they're all widely different experiences, but they all relate to each other in their own kind of margin ways. Mm-hmm. At the very edges of the experiences, there's some core thing that's really common between all of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what draws a lot of people to exploring these kind of realms, because there's something holding it all together, and it's really hard to investigate just because of how powerful the experiences are. Which is why I am very thankful to all the psychonauts out there. After that, it sort of snowballed into more often LSD use, and eventually I tried DMT for the first time. That was about a year and a half after I first tried psychedelics, and it was about my 10th trip ever. And a lot of people describe DMT as flying forward into the chrysanthemum of kaleidoscopic lights and being thrust into a new world. When I did it, I went backwards. And I sort of shrunk outside of the universe. And I saw the whole thing at once, and then I zoomed back into myself where I was in a big loop. It's just one big circle.
Hmm. And were you by yourself when you did DMT?
Yeah. I was under the impression when I had started to come up, I did the trick where you put foil on the bottom of a 2-liter, heat that up, let the vapor collect inside, and just inhale it all at once and hold it, and do that until you have all of it. And I thought I was dying. I thought, crap, this isn't actually DMT, and I'm about to die. Okay. And I just put on my headphones, turned on the music I was going to listen to, and laid down and died. And then I woke up a few minutes later, and just ineffable, really, at that point. It was so profound that everything was connected in this big loop. And it's sort of always been connected. And it's so hard to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But it gave me a sort of reassurance that it's really all fine. There's not really a lot to be worried about. It all works out. It's just a little turbulent at times. It's part of the experience. It wouldn't be the same without it. And another big thing I gained from that was synesthesia, full spectrum synesthesia without psychedelics in my daily life. And that was the whole seeing more in everything that I was getting while I was on psychedelics. And it was a very natural feeling type of extra sense, I guess.
And what exactly is that?
Synesthesia is when your senses can be interpreted as different senses. So you can sort of smell colors or like hear tastes.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, they all sort of mix into just sense. And I can figure out which ones are sourced from which receptors, but they all go through sense before all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like an extra layer of processing to everything. It feels to me like that's something that's like capable in everyone and could be unlocked through different practices, not necessarily only psychedelics, but I definitely think it's something people could benefit from if it's a thing we ever figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before with people, and actually when this summer when I met with a psychic medium, and she even said, and I've had this idea, she's like, that everybody is psychic. It's just that some people are, their senses are more aware, that they notice that they have, like, almost like you said, an extra sense, and that it's all kind of everything. And it really makes sense. How can I sit here and talk about how the brain is so amazing and capable of so many things, and I've experienced that through psychedelics, and not think that the brain has extraordinary capabilities at all times. And what is your brain but a conglomerate of all your senses? And so if you can, really be aware that you're able to control that and harness that, I mean, I think you could say that you didn't get synesthesia from DMT. You realized you had it, like, almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like I realized there are extra lanes on the road that I wasn't using.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's hard for me not having that awareness to, like, kind of even imagine, what that's like. But, I think it's really cool, hearing you talk about it.
I do admit that there are times when it's not as useful. When you get like zoned into something and you see like all the math like floating in front of you, and you see how all the pieces connect, and it's like, can you just do the simple task? And it can get distracting because some things are really, really interesting and we take them for granted a lot of the time. And this sort of brings back that wonder that I had when I was a kid that sort of, I guess, got covered up by the minutiae of everyday life.
What's an example of that?
There are some parts. I do automotive CAD design, just 3D modeling on a computer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I have some parts that we've produced, and it's fun to fiddle with them and look at all the different mechanisms and the way things interact and how all the different pieces were constructed and manufactured. and all the steps along the way, and just seeing all that just by looking at it without needing all the details, and it's all just there in full, and grasping all of that just in a single sense. Like I could just touch it and I know all that stuff. It's really weird. At first, it was a lot like sensory overload because everything was just coming in crazy, like static. And it's hard to function like that. So I've really had to grow into it and learn how to understand it better. But I do often find myself getting carried away with like a Wikipedia article, and I know that's a common thing, but seeing how the different pieces connect to so many different pieces in the background that we aren't aware are connected is very intriguing. And you get a lot of hidden information just by looking at anything. I know people talk about like coincidences and synchronicity. It's like that to a whole new extreme.
There's worse things to get lost into.
I suppose that's true. It's especially fun with art, though.
Yeah, certainly. I can imagine. So at this point in your journey, in your psychedelic journey and life journey, you just knew that was not going away, right? And you just knew you had to figure out how to work with it?
Yeah, it was being looped onto like a zip line, and that's just the life I'm going forward into, and that's just what I'm doing now. It was exciting, and there are parts of my life where it makes me want to just step out of it all and get a breather, even though I know I can't, just because of how deep and intense it is. And it's not an easy path, I could tell you that much. And I know a lot of people who've traveled it can say the same thing. After that, I just knew that I had to explore more psychedelics, so I was trying them on my own, sometimes with friends. I ended up trying it with one of my sisters one of these times, and there was one time that everything just sort of aligned. And I was on LSD, and I was sitting in my car smoking some weed, just as an explorer just kind of relaxes, Gandalf with his pipe or whatever. And it hit me. Everything, like the math didn't check out for whatever reason. All of the thinking I was doing and all the calculations and putting together of pieces just wasn't happening the right way. There was something missing, something wrong, an important element that was not being factored in. And I was looking through all my thoughts and exploring and trying to find it. And just like that, I realized I have to switch genders. And like all the other things, it was like a zip line. And as soon as I realized I need to hook onto this path to get where I'm trying to go, I did it. And it was just full steam ahead transition from there. And I woke up in the morning and I told my dad, and it explained a lot of the feelings and emotions and perceptions that I had through my entire life that were just colorless. And as soon as I started hormones, all those memories and all those experiences just were flooded with joy and rainbows and puppies and just amazing stuff. And it was without a doubt the best decision I'd ever made in my life.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. To go back to the original moment, was it that you felt you had to switch genders, or did you feel like I've always been the wrong
I feel
gender?
like the latter, that I needed to transition to be who I was born to be. I was this all along, and I just never looked in the right kind of mirror to realize it. And it's the mirror of psychedelics, because they really show us who we are.
and you felt like that's why things weren't adding up, is because that calculation
Oh,
was wrong
absolutely.
at the start.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But I think it was less so that it was wrong at the start, or rather that it wasn't being considered until this point. Because I think it was important for me to have both perspectives of being a boy
Yeah.
and a girl. It helps me, I guess, reach more people, being more relatable. But the puzzle of the cosmos in my mind had suddenly flipped over, and there was a picture on the other side. And the pieces were so much easier to connect. You could tell just by feeling the essence of the pieces how they could connect. And I didn't tell you where to put them, but it made it a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. No, I mean it's as far as psychedelic epiphanies go, that's that's as not just as far as the importance of it, but the dedication that I imagine it's taken, for you to see that through, right?
It has been a long road, honestly, yeah. I lucked out, fortunately. Somehow, everyone in my life was very supportive of me, except for these old white guys at work. But their opinions don't really matter.
Yeah.
Uh,
Old white guys suck.
exactly. But everyone was very supportive. The transition went very well. I ended up getting my surgery a year and a week ago. Or no, a year, a month, and a week ago. Oh, that's fun. And that has been a fantastic change to my life. And the whole thing has just been an absolute joy to experience. And ultimately, the destination is a gift in itself and an entire experience as well.
Yeah.
To figure out who I really am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean that's the thing is that I think a lot of our struggle in life is trying to find our sense of self, and if as much as we want to believe that our higher self, our universal self that is eternal, um, kind of has no gender. I feel like it does. I don't know if you feel that way when talking about our higher self, but everything in life has a yin and a yang, and there's a duality to life, and I kind of feel like even that eternal plane has that. And I think, maybe that's what, you were in touch with, is that higher self, and that higher self, at least for this point in this lifetime, wasn't syncing up with the gender you were, before you had that opinion, or how do you feel about that? Do you feel that there isn't gender in our higher self?
That's a tricky thing to think about from this end, because for me, gender is more of the specific, I guess, flowing of color that you are, and it's like the sound that color makes, and the sort of curves that it bends to, and none of those really clump into any gender system as we experience it today. It's just roles. They're not gender roles, they're just roles. And you just whatever you want, really.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the way things are done today, a lot of carryover stuff from when things were developing socially, I guess, and culturally. So a lot of the work I had to do was escape those norms of what everything is or isn't, and what people say it is and should be or could be or needs to be. I had to step outside of all of that to get the perspective I have here today.
Yeah.
And for me, gender of higher self is more the reach of what you can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just how adaptable you are. And at that point, gender is more of a hierarchy, but it can be traveled, traversed. It can be changed. It's not some fixed thing.
Yeah.
You can grow, you can fall. But you can do all of it willingly. There are some parts where it's not so fun, but it's all part of the adventure in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's hard to separate the gender of ourself from the gender of our culture. Yeah, like you said, I guess that a lot of what makes me feel masculine is all cultural stuff. It's all I don't know, the fantasy football leagues and all these working with tools and stuff like that. Things that feminine culture is totally capable of. It's just that we tend not to fall into those roles. So I guess I see, what how it's hard to separate our culture from our identity. Um, I think what I meant about higher self having gender is more like, I've definitely on mushrooms more than any other psychedelic felt that they have a spirit, um, and that there's something else, communicating with me. And I've often and almost always felt like a feminine presence, which I don't feel on any other psychedelics or any other drugs. And there's been several instances where I totally felt a feminine spirit, and I don't, other than saying I was having a brief moment of synesthesia under psychedelics. Like I don't even know how to describe that. It's not even like I heard anything or saw anything. It was just I felt a feminine spirit, and that's why what leads me to believe that like there, even though our higher self can be devoid of all the things that make up our ego, all the culture that makes up our identity, that there's still some sort of duality there that possibly I believe in like having lifetime after lifetime. And it's like I like to play with that thought of like, in all of my lifetimes, have I always been a male, or is or whatever? And I don't know, because that's my culture and identity kind of putting that label on it.
I get what you mean, yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to pick out the pieces that are ours and what come from like the influences around us and sort out what really is going on. And I don't think that's anything we'll do anytime soon.
No.
But I definitely have sort of entity presence experiences through my trips, mostly on LSD, honestly, more so than DMT.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly. And it's hard to describe exactly, but I think part of it is that we're used to picking things out and putting them into boxes and sorting them into these dual ways. So to the entity, they might be something completely non-binary. It just doesn't fit into the boxes we have, but we can loosely fit it into some box and our brain fills in the rest, like it does with all of our senses.
Yeah.
It's always difficult to explore these kinds of places, and I don't know, I'm trying to be courteous to the entities, I guess, more than anything, because I don't know how they identify.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I've never experienced, like full on kind of entity encounter other than just like, an essence. Like I've never.
Oh no, me too.
Oh, okay. I thought you.
It's only ever been presences. I've
I
only
got
ever
you.
gotten a presence from entities. I've never seen one. It's
I
never
got you.
come to me in that kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. Our, the guest on our last podcast who had plenty of experiences, distinctly communicating with very, clear entities. I think there's that's like one end of the spectrum, and then I guess there's all sorts of encounters you can have with other extra intelligence through psychedelics. And I think we get caught up on thinking when people say an entity encounter or whatever, we immediately go to the the Terrence McKenna style talking to machine elves. So and often with reading about that and talking to people that have done that, I kind of dumb down my own experiences. But I've definitely had plenty of times where I was learning from or just feeling the presence or the essence of something that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm. It really is confusing.
Yeah.
With the overlap of all the different terminologies and trying to capture and convey these experiences.
Yeah. So.
Do you ever, I guess not in your free time, but in your thought patterns, do you ever like look back and just think of the way things were in a positive light? Or is it more so that isn't me anymore and I'm just moving
I
forward?
try to take all of my past and reduce the negative outlook I have on it to only the key components that I can change and learn from. Because if there's just a lot of angry regret over a small thing, I should be paying more attention to the small thing than the regret. So I try to use the most positive light on the life I've had so far and carry on that positivity through it and towards the people around me so I can make a better impact on the world in a positive way. So I try to use my past as a sort of jet fuel.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you were saying, it helps you relate to both sides, It's not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not something where you don't know the other side, you know it. So that's pretty cool.
So you mentioned that you've when I talked to you before, you mentioned that you've recently or I think recently like reintroduced your dad to psychedelics. And why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Reintroduced is a loose way to put it. He was a deadhead growing up. He would follow the band around, and he enjoyed that. And he always talks positively of it. He's got all these nostalgia. You can see him like zone out and remember and just smile and enjoy it. And he took a break from it after he got started with his career, understandably so. But when he learned that I had tried mushrooms the first time, he had started talking about the trips he had where he saw like spheres of light floating over the audience at like Pink Floyd concerts and stuff. And just giant bags of mushrooms, just classic late 19, I'm not even sure what year it was. But he found out I did psychedelics and he was curious about it. And he was like, hey, do you think maybe I could try some? And he ended up tripping on his own, and he ended up tripping with a girlfriend to help, I guess, butter up their connection or something. And I never had the opportunity to trip with him because my life took a concerning turn through a point of my psychonaut journey, psychonaut career at this point. And he didn't want to lead to more problems, so that got postponed indefinitely. But I've had the opportunity to smoke weed with him and enjoy sharing our stories and talking about the concepts. And he's not totally closed to the idea of it, but it's definitely a thing he's worried about for me.
Mm-hmm. Just because he's worried about the safety of the drugs and stuff.
Well, putting it out there, the amount of LSD I've used has put me in the hospital on numerous occasions, and it has affected my mental health just because of how irresponsible I was with it.
Oh, okay.
And understandably, he doesn't see it in the best of light from where he's at right now.
Yeah, I could see that.
If you don't mind me asking, what size, like, are you saying dose wise it was unhealthy, or like frequency?
A bit of both. So
okay.
after I had started hormones, I was on them for about 2 months, and I had a trip on about 150 micrograms of LSD with a friend of mine. He was from college, and we were tripping at his house in a quaint little neighborhood that had an elementary school in it. It was very suburban. It was very pleasant, I guess. And at the start of the trip, we'd taken the tabs and smoked some weed to get our pre-flight jitters out of the way. We laid down and listened to some music for the come up, and it felt like there was an entity or presence sequencing my body. It was going through like a bunch of pre-flight checks for like checking all my muscles and the ranges of motion that my limbs had. It felt completely autonomous, like I wasn't trying to do any of it, and it was following a very particular pattern as it was building itself. And I was laying down, and I ended up sitting up, slowly checking more ranges of motion in different sort of positions. I ended up standing. By this point, my friend was already outside. The music was off. And it eventually got to a point where I got the okay to go, and I was able to walk. And I went through all the safety checks, and I took that first step. And I ended up outside, and we explored a little bit. And as we were walking down the sidewalk towards the school, there was a buzz in the air. You ever get those sort of like tinglies when you're hearing an emotional song or something? And it's those chills, that frisson. Mm-hmm. It was like walking into like a membrane where that was just happening everywhere, constantly. Is this weird force field of just fuzz on all my touch. And it smelled like butterscotch and orange sherbet. And we walked up on this hill and sat at the base of a tree and just took in the nature, because it was a very, I guess, decorated with plants area. It was a very nice nature area. And the air was a bit humid, and it was the perfect summer afternoon. I guess it was spring still. And we sat at the tree, and the bugs started crawling on us, so I figured we lost our spot there. It was already taken. And as we walked down the hill back onto the sidewalk, there was a cloud on the ground of this yellow mist that was like glowing inside of itself. And as we walked through it, I got more of that fuzz where I touched it. And we could move it around, and there was turbulence when you walked through it, and you could scoop it up, and it was a fully physics responding fluid that was somehow in my trip. Eventually, I decided I wanted to investigate it more, as I do. And I scooped some up in my hand. And I told my friend, hey, hold out your hands in a cup. And he did. And I poured it into his hands, and he was holding it. And I'm like, are you seeing this stuff? He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But he was interacting with it. There were other people interacting with it. There were just people from the neighborhood on a walk. And I could see different glowing colors around people that sort of tied in with my synesthesia and auras, I guess, as people describe them. And when I held this stuff in my hands and looked at my hands through it, they appeared aged. And especially my friend's hands. His aged even more than mine did. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to compress this stuff like a snowball. And it did. It definitely compressed. And as it did, that light that it glowed inside of itself focused to a single point, and it was a pin of light shining like a star, or like a headlight if you have astigmatism or something. And I could hold it in my fingers, and it was this glowing pin of light with a halo around it. And I looked at my hand through it, and it was like a lens, and my hand on the other side wasn't my hand, it was a baby's hand. And my friend's hand was a baby's hand. And it completely warped time perception or something. So I figured that was interesting, so I made a mental note of it. And we went back home, back to his house, and I was playing around with that pin of light in the kitchen, and I found out that I could compress it more. And it would get these solid, flat, planar surfaces on it. And it was an octahedron, 8-sided out of 4 or equilateral triangles. And I later found out that a modified version of the octahedron is what can be described as the perfect shape. It has the most area and the least surface area, or most volume, least surface area, for any shape that can be patterned infinitely in 3-dimensional space without leaving any gaps. This is magic perfect shape. And I ate it. I ate the pin of light. And it's been with me basically since then.
That's crazy. And do you, what did eating it change inside you?
It wasn't immediately noticeable at first. But eventually I realized that was the need or the ultimate drive, the passion to pursue the path of psychedelics to the intensities that I did. Because after that trip, every single weekend for the next year and a half, I dosed about 200 to 400 micrograms of LSD.
Wow.
And at the end of it, in the last 2 months, I did breaks every other weekend and started ramping up the dose, 500, 600, capped at 1,000 at the very end of it. And that was with a clean tolerance, and that was a torturous trip, an absolutely hellish trip, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, no matter how terrible they were. It was just excruciatingly torturous. But after that, I ended up in the hospital on 3 separate occasions from that last trip. And I had severe HPPD for about 3 months until I got put on antipsychotics that were doing the job right. And HPPD is a hallucinogenic persisting perception disorder. It's kind of like when some trip effects persist after the drug is worn off.
Yeah.
And this was at like 100 microgram dose for 3 months, sober. And it made life absolutely impossible to function in. I couldn't do anything, not reasonably. Somehow I kept a job and survived, but is really my dad that kept me through all of it. And that's why he doesn't like the path that I'm on as much as I'd prefer he did.
Yeah. How much, or have you researched, do you think, like, having that X factor of taking hormone therapy, do you think that played any part in getting the HPPD?
I think it did. Because the estrogen made things flow better. And it was easier to keep a momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So that all that trip juice was still flowing through me by the end of it. And I had to process it out of my system before I could get back to normal. And it took a long time, and it was a lot of concentrated effort.
Mm-hmm. What made you, what was like motivating you to do such high dosage? Was it just that light that was inside of you? Like what was, was there at some point where, it turned into almost like a addiction, or, until that last trip was it all good and you felt like you had to keep pushing it, or what was driving you there?
Well, at first it was just an urge to look deeper. But after a point, the desire became out of my control. It felt like an honest addiction that I had no control over. I went to Narcotics Anonymous after the end of it to help myself stay clean and work through what was obviously a problem in my life. And through the experience, towards the latter half of it, I started developing absolute psychotic symptoms, dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. I was shifting through personalities and dissociating constantly. And it was like I was in different worlds simultaneously, and they were all just filtering through this body. And I couldn't keep track of any of it. I lost my job. I lost a lot of money. A lot of relationships that I had were ruined. And it, like, it's hard to describe how bad it felt through all of it. A lot of anxiety, panic attacks daily, constant depression. Eventually I had to be put on medications at the end of it, and even those barely helped.
Yeah.
I don't recommend it to pretty much anyone.
Yeah. No, and there's obviously some people that can do that amount and that frequently and seem to have no problems, or at least in their Reddit posts or whatever, don't indicate. But that's one thing that I don't like, that that part of the psychedelic culture that's like, you need to push it farther. And, like there's these people that seem to want to become superhuman or whatever. And there's a real human risk to that, and I mean, it's, I'm glad that you are, came out of it okay. And you're, preaching the dangers of psychedelic, or LSD at least, as much as, how much it's benefited you, I think that's always an important thing to have. And, it's something, I always try to get across in my YouTube videos about my own experiences, or the podcast episodes with other people, is that, toxicity wise, psychedelics are generally pretty safe, especially mushrooms. But psychologically, like if you have a hard time with it, it's not because, you're any less brave than anyone else. Like there is that danger, of having real psychedelic or psychological conditions that arise from it, you know?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it has to do with where you are in life, setting.
Yeah.
Really controls a lot of what you get out of a trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not paying the mind to that I should have been.
Yeah.
So with those like bad experiences, it hasn't deterred you to the point, obviously, that you're crossing off psychedelics as a negative, you know? So are you looking to go back into the exploration, or have you gone back into the exploration, or where are you at currently with that and yourself?
I am still definitely exploring. I find them to be a very valuable tool for any sort of psychonaut. In the past year or so, I've been getting more comfortable using them responsibly and not abusing them the way I was. And since then, I've tried 4-HO-MET, 4-ACO-DMT, ALD52, 1P-LSD, and Pharmahuasca, which is like a home done ayahuasca. And I've got to say, I really should have been taking it slower and learning more things before diving in headfirst.
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely say that there's a lot of interesting stuff when you mix things the right way. Because I've tried 4-ACO DMT and ALD52 mixed together at about a medium dose of each. I don't recall the exact numbers. But the way they synergize, they sort of make up for what the other lacks, and it produces a whole new flavor of trip that you can't get otherwise.
That's cool.
Yeah, there was a time that I was in my bathroom exploring the floor tiles, as one does in the bathroom on a trip, and a door opened up on the wall. As I sort of got closer to it, I could feel that there was a passageway there, and I moved my mind towards it, and it was like an undulating hallway of orange noduled flesh, and each corrugation of it expanded into another infinite hallway of just psychedelic bookshelves almost. And I think it's what a lot of people have described as like a library of Akash or something, where it's just raw information about the universe in a language that is completely universal. And I was looking at the architecture of the library rather than the content of it itself. And I wanted to learn more about how the information collects here rather than any specific page in a book. Those are the types of things that I tried to get out of the trip, was more how the message came across than the message. Because I know sure as heck that I ain't gonna get the full message clear and take that back. So instead of taking clips of static and trying to piece together some foreign language, I'm trying to figure out the channels of the language to figure out how they could even be put together in the first place. And it feels like a real backdoor approach that I don't notice a lot of other people taking. And that's really what drew me to this finding the others type of path, and ultimately this podcast, is that there are ways to explore this that we aren't considering, and we have to be collaborating to figure this out in new ways. It's as simple as that. Working together gets things done.
Yeah, there's do you know the guy there's a lot of YouTube clips, and he gives a talk on eating 31 grams of mushrooms. Kalindi IE.
Yes.
Yeah. I love him. I love a lot of what he has to say and everything. And, I think he's just as important a psychedelic voice as Terrence McKenna or anyone else. But there's one thing that he says that I really disagree with. And he says that, specifically mushrooms, but, you can correlate it to just psychedelics in general. And he said that they are supposed to be a journey of the alone into the alone. And, I've felt that for sure. I've had deep psychedelic experiences where I felt super alone, and I felt this, realization that you're always alone no matter what, and stuff like that. And I get that, but I love more the feeling of community that I get from psychedelics when I'm in that state where I'm feeling very connected. This summer when I had my first LSD trip, in I can't even remember how long it had been, 15 years or so. And I did 150 micrograms. I was by myself. I went to my property in New York and was just, communing with nature. But I would come in and from outside and go to my phone and, kind of live tweet it or whatever, but on the Discord channel, and just like send pictures and text to everyone, was kind of like keeping tabs on what I was up to. And it felt so awesome, and this is just a small little, like me just tripping, having a good time. If you compound that out to what psychedelics can do for, what positive things psychedelics can do, that's a very community thing. Like, yes, we can use them to benefit our own journey, of the alone into the alone, but coming back, talking about it, going on podcasts and telling our story, making YouTube videos or, insightful posts on social media and stuff like that. Even that is helping unify, like, our ability to explain and discover what the meaning is of all of this, of why the human brain is able to have this experience. And, it's what drove me to start a YouTube channel, to, at the very least, get my voice out there and not keep my journey of the alone, and, I hate thinking that psychedelics are only meant for a personal journey. Like, there's a communal thing here. There's a communal good. We can actually, change the zeitgeist of society through, having deep realizations of peace, love, and understanding, which is what I think that psychedelics are capable of. And we can't do that alone. We have to do that together,
Absolutely. Building a more wonderful world isn't really a place you want to be by yourself.
Yeah.
In fact, you really couldn't. A lot of that ties into the kind of work that I'm inevitably ending towards as an end goal, is a sort of project that'll allow people to tap into that collaborative type of mindset in a way that is fully seamless with perception, but boundless in capacity. So it's like sharing dreams, but they're also fully perceptive. They're not like half perceptions like dreams often are. It's just as real. And it's a long way down the road, but I know it all ties together because I've been through the whole thing. I've been around the loop with the DMT.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there is a lot of capability to reality, human ingenuity, and working together that can allow for something like this to exist, like a complete in-depth virtual reality shared space that allows our imaginations to flow free and allows us to be whoever we want to be and find out who we are. without like having to worry about any of the issues that having disagreements cause, because they don't have to be carried over into the regular world. And it's a long way into the future. I know it's kind of a bit of a pipe dream, but
Yeah.
it's the kind of world I want to see. It's a bit like the fine-tuning a trip to be exactly an experience. You could download a dream and just go to bed and have an adventure that is designed to be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've mentioned on a lot of episodes of the podcast, but like I do think that there's going to be a blending of psychedelics and technology that will be the ultimate advancement in virtual reality, and whether that's dreams or just some uber realistic video game where you live a whole lifetime in half an hour or whatever it is, I think that's a ways down the road too, but I think there's that capability here, like where we're going as an organism, is towards that, and blending consciousness and consensus reality, and providing, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking of like like the movie like Total Recall or something like that. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that.
Yeah.
But like stuff like that where, that could be where we're heading to, and unfortunately, like in that movie, for instance, it's an escape from like a world that's, kind of become too crowded and stuff like that. So I hope that's not the reason that happens, but, like, I don't know. I think we're heading that direction, and the if you look at like psychedelics in the 60s and 70s, it was a distinct different culture and a distinct counterculture, and psychedelics were only used in like, the people that were open about it were just, the hippie subculture, the deadheads and stuff like that. But you had this fringe behind the scenes culture of scientists that were using it, and then it became illegal, and then they either stopped or weren't open about it anymore. And then now that even though they're still illegal and you're starting to see people talk about it more, like the people that are talking about it are, people that are developing all the software that's going to run our lives in the near future, and I think there's a blurring of the lines between psychedelia and people that are investigating the consciousness and technology.
Yeah, a lot of pieces moving together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really anyone's guess as to how it's going to look when it finally happens. If it's a gradual thing, a sudden thing, good or bad, we really can't tell.
Yeah. And, and I talk about this all the time too, that it's all like humans seem to be just like moving towards decentralization, where, there's I follow cryptocurrency and stuff like that, and there's always this meme that people put out there that like the largest transportation company in the world is a decentralized gig economy, basically, with Uber and Lyft. The largest like retail website in the world is Alibaba, that doesn't have any merchandise, like it's all decentralized peer-to-peer or whatever. And then, they're always trying to reference that Bitcoin is the biggest bank in the world and it's decentralized. And I don't think it is yet, but I think it's heading that way. But I think that psychedelics represent decentralized thought, that up until like psychedelics became very common, every thought was very centralized, and it still is for the most people, but there's people that are breaking out, and that's the others, right? In that you followed some school of thought that was dictated from some sort of organization, whether that's a political organization or a religious organization, or, well, they're pretty much the same, but from your community or your family or whatever, like everyone kind of just followed someone, a tradition of thought, and it was very centralized. It originated from a central point. And psychedelics seem to definitely like just blast that to smithereens, and you start to think for yourself. I've talked to almost nobody through the psychedelic channel that would come off to me as like, just a sheep following someone else's thoughts and values and ideals. Like everyone has similar, because they've all had this similar psychedelic experience, but there's always a little different twist to it. They've gotten something different. And like one of our previous guests said, is like, who runs a psychedelic integration circle, he said that it's really interesting to have these conversations, because it's like you come back from these psychedelic experiences and you only have a couple pieces to the puzzle. And while you were in there, you saw the whole puzzle. But once you start having these conversations, it's like everyone has a different piece to the same puzzle, which goes back to what we were talking about like the communal nature of psychedelics is almost paramount to understanding them.
Yeah, it's like learning how to swim in the mainstream and figuring out what's water and what's people, mm-hmm. and what we're actually navigating here.
It really does come down to the freedom of thinking, though, and of trying your hardest to remove the traditional thought pattern, though. And it's a challenge to do. Yeah. But I was talking the other day to my brother about this, and Andrew Dice Clay is a comedian that was super big in the 90s. Still is pretty big today, but supposedly was like the first comedian to start selling out arenas and whatnot. Yeah. And once I heard about that, I started listening to his material from back then, and especially like his unscripted material, where it was just him going up and riffing. And I never had heard of him until like, a week ago, or I guess I never had the inclination of going and listening to his audio until from a week ago. And I had never knew about him until probably a year ago, but it kept coming into my life. And eventually I was like, all right, I should probably listen to this, And then I started listening to it. And I'm like, wait, this is when I was growing up. Why did I not know about this growing up? Like, why did my parents not tell me about this? And it's just how out there the thoughts are that it probably scared the baby boomers, that we can't have them thinking not this traditional way, you know?
Well, he was like the dirtiest comic at that time. And like, where like
and like pushing boundaries.
Yeah, where like most people that are used to comedy now would probably think he's actually kind of lame and hacky, but just, if you take into account at the time that it was, and it was so different from like, the mainstream comedians, and were, Jerry Seinfeld going like, what's the deal with whatever, and like Dice was a fucking hurricane that came through, and changed stand-up comedy for forever, and you brought up the fact that he was like the first one selling out like Madison Square Garden. Like, I think he sold it out like 7 nights in a row or something like that. And, he influenced so many comedians that are like, man, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be grinding away for $100 a night, like I want to do that. But like you said, it was really so different. If the comedian's job is to, turn the mirror around on society and on the audience, like, I don't know, he definitely changed the way comedians represent, the society at the time.
I think it's meant to be like a critique of
Mm-hmm.
conventional thinking.
Yeah.
And like, but yeah, when it clicked to the point that I was just like, oh, that's why I never heard of him, is because it would have gone against Catholic school, and it would have gone against, the Catholic family. So it was just like, oh, now that makes sense now. But even having that thought and figuring that out and connecting those dots, that all comes from the psychedelics and the kind of the goal of a decentralized thought, I like to call it just original thought, where it's at least feels completely unique to yourself.
Yeah.
And it seems like something that you've never heard before,
Yeah. Well, and you've mentioned it too, in the vein of decentralized thought, like the role of, well, not the role, but like the importance of internet now, and in like, you have to really be a stubborn, like, or stubborn, or like just somehow isolated from all other schools of thought to really still be stuck in those original, centralized thoughts that come down from power structures of 50, 60 years ago. Like there's so much information and misinformation that you have to really discern everything you see and hear, and all the values you were tried to taught. You really have to take that into account to have a solid opinion, or and that's the internet. That it's so hard for politicians to lie. It's so hard for religious leaders to lie. So like that's like you said, there's no going back. You've said that a bunch of times.
Yeah. I think it is a yes or a no there, though, because just as everything is evolving and is providing anecdotal evidence on a person-to-person basis, just as fast as that's happening and people are like looking into those stories, the corporations that are interested in thought control, I'm not talking like mind control craziness, I'm just saying like directing your thoughts, what we talked about the one episode with the big hack, or the great hack, or whatever it was called. Those are rapidly advancing just as well. So you could even think that you are beyond these ideologies that are, I guess, sent your way. You can think that you're beyond those, but you're still within a certain ideology that was sent your way somewhere else. It's just like a weird battle for your mind. It's really strange.
Not me, man. I'm woke as fuck.
You follow me on that?
Yeah,
though?
no, I know. I was just saying that's what everyone thinks.
No, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go too far off.
No. I was kidding, because that's what people would say. It's hard to. You can definitely fall into like, I'm the only fucking sane motherfucker here kind of mentality, where like, no, you're just as confused and angry and pissed off as everyone else. Like, you can find any hole in the internet to fall into and be like, yeah, I'm the only one that gets it. That's why everyone else is crazy, and not realize that, you're just following some website that, says whatever, says the earth is flat or whatever,
Yeah, whatever you want to believe, there's proof out there, or quote unquote proof that you can find.
Well, we got a little off topic there.
Yeah.
Kind of. There was a huge component of my LSD journey that focused a lot on decentralized thought and just the network of the thinkernet instead of the internet. And it honestly felt like a genuine concept that actually already exists, and that it's something that we aren't used to tapping into because we're so, I guess, engrossed by the senses and the distractions we have today. And as we move more decentralized, it's something that we'll be able to sort of tap back into and I guess rediscover, because it's always felt like that's sort of how I've been connecting with not the entities, but the presence of whatever else is out there, whatever it is. And it was through that decentralized thinker net.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, well, the idea of decentralized thought doesn't, I guess,
oh no, like I kind of get what you mean, but as more of a metaphorical sort of social variable.
Well, yeah, what I was going to say is like, I guess it puts this idea in your head when you think of that, of like everyone has independent thought, but actually it's more like a hive mind kind of thing, but not like dictated from the queen, if that makes sense. It's like, and maybe it's tapping into that extra sense that we were talking about with synesthesia, and everyone's kind of starting to realize they have that or whatever, or have that potential or capability. But it's like, just because of how fast information flows, tides change quicker. As far as social change and stuff like that, we're also easily distracted from where we should be going and stuff like that, just as easy because of that flow of information. But decentralized thought, I guess, isn't totally like independent thought. It's just more representative, maybe, I guess.
Having your voice louder than the ones you're listening to yourself, realizing what voice is actually yours and being able to guide it through the world more connected with the experiences you're having.
Well, I mean, a good example is, to go back to, how easy you found it to be accepted by your friends and family when going through your transition. Before, when we had very, very, very centralized thought, that would have been a lot more difficult, regardless of who your family was. There was less people that would be okay with that idea. But now that, there's so much more information, and so much more like acceptance and stuff like that, that all comes from, the fact that people are everyone's starting to think for themselves and not just be like, well, my preacher said that this is bad, and so that's what I think. Like, people are forming their own opinion regardless of what their beliefs are. They're starting to question the centralized power structures and the thoughts and morals and values that are trying to get passed along. So your journey would have been, while it was still difficult, like you said, would have been much more difficult 50 years ago,
Yeah, people are breaking out of the waters of the old mainstream and exploring, I guess, somewhere closer to where I'm from in the regard of society, as it were. It's less about being together, more about being yourself together.
Let me ask this. We talked about culture and identity playing a role in our view of self when it comes to gender. Has your journey, while it's obviously been very spiritual, and helping you find your spiritual identity in regards to your gender, has it pushed you towards, I don't know how to phrase the question, but have you dove into like the culture of, either
like LGBT culture,
right, like that, or just straight, feminine culture? Or did you always feel that way?
I always felt like I didn't belong. that's just how it felt. And I wasn't really sure how to place it. And even at this point, I'm still not exactly sure how to place it. I've tried going to different groups and meetups for LGBT people to discuss I guess, the way it is in life today for that kind of group. And I didn't feel like I fit in there either. I just felt so other.
Well, I'm not going to say you're the only one that's had that kind of epiphany on psychedelics, but you're probably, one of the rare few, and to find community in that culture, like, yeah, you took a different path there. I feel like,
Yeah, it wasn't really like I couldn't relate to all the people because a lot of them always felt like, yeah, growing up, I was like, when am I gonna get my whatever? And why am I growing up weird? Why isn't this happening? And I didn't really have any expectations when I was growing up. It was just nothing really made a whole lot of sense. And then everything wasn't really adding up. And I was just being patient and letting it do its thing. And I'd figured it'll make sense eventually. But it never made the same kind of sense that other people's adventures in this realm had. It's just always so different.
Yeah.
That's why it's been hard for me to relate to those kind of communities, but I still want to be able to help and reach out to them. So I think it's an important perspective for me to have on top of all the others.
Yeah. But you feel that the psychedelic community is more your
absolutely
culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Even still, though, I prefer a more focused psychedelic culture than social party psychedelic culture. A more scientific, therapeutic type of medicinal approach to it as a way to treat the old broken mainstream.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, that's what our Discord server is all about. So, I mean, I'm definitely glad you found your way there,
Yeah, and I'll always be happy to answer questions anyone has for me, talk to people, and meet new people, make new friends. It's always fun.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half. Was there any other topics you wanted to riff on for a little bit, or?
Not okay. So I want to introduce to you, and I guess the listeners, a concept.
Okay.
And I've had to do a lot of wordsmithing, like Shakespeare. You just develop new words that just work. They're not exactly tied to the existing languages because it's trying to move in a different direction, like a mitosis of language. So I've had to develop new words to understand the psychedelic experience a little deeper. And it eventually became what I hope to, in the future, turn into a field of study that is more mathematically and rigorously investigated. And I call it transmuonic computropics. And it's the study of the connectedness of pieces of the cosmos.
Huh.
And the way they form the harmonic calliope of perception. And how that perception develops into itself to learn about the mechanics that it develops upon. So it's about as big of an umbrella of study that I could reasonably get into so few words. Because it touches on basically everything, and every field of study is just a different sort of intersection and of folding of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's just bending through so many different dimensions to touch itself in very specific ways that just works. It makes stuff, and there's more of it, and we just seem to be exploring more of it. It's just more information, even though thermodynamically there's nothing more. It's just different. So we're unfolding more nothingness out of the nothingness that is everything.
Well, or we're unfolding our understanding of it.
Right.
We're built. Yeah,
exactly. We're developing something new out of something that's not really anything.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my shameless plug, as others do, to the server where I try to capture and share the experiences I have from the perspective that I have developed through my Psychonaut journey. So hit me up if you want to learn about that. It's hard to get into too many details, but there are a lot of interesting words like, let me see, a thingery. It's like a zoo of transformations you can apply to concepts that exists in a way that's almost like an encapsulated ecosystem of interactions, but it's purely abstract and none of it is really anything. So it's really hard to get any grasp of how it's supposed to exist. But like typing on a computer, talking into the voice, recording it, and making a podcast is just thingery. You're doing stuff with things, so it's thingery.
I do a lot of thingery, I feel like.
Yeah, it's basically every action we do is part of some thingery.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so this is the name of the server that I am putting all this in and organizing it in is called the Constellus of Mu. So it's like I take constellations of perception and organize them in ways that are somewhat relatable, the same way ancient philosophers did with the stars in space. I take the stars of perception of raw sense that I experience through synesthesia, and I connect them in new ways that develops new hidden information or untapped information about the world that is simplified and fundamental to the way everything unfolds from nothing. And inevitably, this became an entire language, and I'm still exploring it because it sort of builds itself as the universe does. And I've called it synesthesia.
And that's a Discord server that
you're
doing? Or?
The Constellus is the Discord server, but the focus of it is synesthesia.
Synesthesia.
Which is a subfield of transmuonic computropics. And it's the language part of it. And I guess the computropics is the syntax of the language. It's a very confusing thing, and there's a lot of weird pieces. It's foreign, but eerily relatable. Because it's like those small pieces you're talking about before. It's like you saw it out of the corner of your eye in a trip, but it's not what you're paying attention to, so it's not what you took back with you. But someone else did. Mm-hmm. They saw that piece. And the way they translate it, you can recognize, oh, I saw that piece too before. And you can put it there. Yeah. And eventually it builds this whole picture. And it ends up being just life.
Yeah. One person can't build a language. It takes everyone speaking it,
Yeah. And I take all the interactions I have, all the way things relate, and I reach through thoughts that have trailed off, but not fully, that can eventually touch back on to what I was working on. And it's like subconsciously keeping track of ideas that you just wouldn't be able to otherwise by letting it do it itself. Because the thoughts have a sort of momentum, and it's like juggling ideas but like a throw could last for months until you catch it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, jeez. No, kitty. Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, that's a hard topic to digest, but
yeah, I ended up going deep with my adventure. I'm trying to get it back, but
yeah.
So,
but I'll definitely check that out, and send us a link, and we'll put it, when we post this episode and stuff, and we'll post your link for you and everything.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to see any new faces.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for reaching out, and you've got an amazing story, and I really appreciate the way you're able to describe all your experiences and stuff like that, and I look forward to talking with you more on the Discord server, and we'll try and have you on the podcast again further down the road. As always, thank you for listening to the Help Find the Others podcast. Please don't forget to check out our Discord server to connect with our growing community. The link to join can be found in the description. And if you feel like donating to our channel to help us grow, a link to our Patreon can also be found in the description, as well as some cryptocurrency wallet addresses. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast or have any questions about these topics, please email helpfindtheothers@protonmail.com. If you would like to leave a voicemail or a text message question for a future episode, Stan, what's that number again?
567-233-1335.
Okay, guys, thanks again. And until next time, let's help find the others.